You're standing on the dock, your coffee going cold, staring at two boats tied up maybe 30 feet apart. One's a wide catamaran with a cockpit the size of a living room. The other's a narrow monohull that looks like it could cross an ocean tomorrow morning, and you're trying to decide which one gets your life savings. I stood in exactly that spot. I chose wrong the first time. It cost me more than $60,000 to learn why. Here's the truth. Nobody trying to sell you a boat will say out loud, the choice between a cat and a monohull has almost nothing to do with speed or space or which one looks prettier in the listing photos. It comes down to a single measurement that most buyers never take. I didn't take it either, and I paid for it in seasickness, in repair bills, and in one very quiet marriage argument at 2 a.m. offshore. Stay with me, because before the end, I'm going to show you a number that a designer named Robert Perry understood back in 1973. It's a number you can check yourself with a tape measure this weekend. No surveyor, no haul out. And whether this is your first cruising boat or you're trading up to your second, this is the part that saves you from the mistake I made. Let me start with the lie that almost everybody believes when they walk down that dock. The lie is that this is a decision about space. I believed it. When my wife and I started looking, we walked onto a catamaran and it felt like a vacation home. Flat floors. A galley you could actually cook in without bracing your hip against a counter. A cockpit where 4 people could sit and nobody was climbing over anybody. Then we stepped onto a monohull of similar length and it felt like a submarine. Narrow, tilted even at the dock. A quarter berth you had to crawl into like a cave. So we bought the space. We bought a 1999 Lagoon 380, one of the most produced cruising catamarans ever built, drawn by the French design firm Van Peteghem Loriot-Prevost with an interior by Nata. On paper, it was the smart family choice. We paid a little over $140,000 for her, and I remember signing the papers thinking I'd outsmarted every miserable soul who ever got seasick on a heeling monohull. The first weekend at anchor in flat water, I was a genius. The first real passage, I found out what nobody had told me. Because here's what the space actually costs you, and it's not just money, though we'll get to the money. A catamaran doesn't heel, which everybody loves to talk about, but it also doesn't roll through a wave the way a monohull does. It sits on top of 2 hulls, and when a wave rolls under the flat deck that connects those hulls, it slams. It's called bridgedeck slamming, and on a boat with a low bridge deck, it feels like somebody swinging a sledgehammer against the underside of your bed all night, every 8 seconds. That first overnight passage, nobody slept. My wife went from loving that boat to hating it in about 4 hours of head sea. And I sat at the wheel doing math I should have done before I bought her, realizing that the very thing that made the boat feel like a condo at the dock, that big flat deck close to the water, was the thing beating us to death underway. So I want you to understand something. The space is real. The comfort at anchor is real. But the motion is a separate question, and the two are not the same thing, and the brochure will only ever sell you the first one. That's the beginning of what nobody tells you, because the motion problem is fixable if you know what to look for, and most buyers don't even know it exists until they're 60 miles offshore. If you want to go deeper on all of this before you spend a single dollar, I've put everything I learned across 2 boats and 6 hard years into a series of books, Sail Smart, Deep Water, and Sail Clear. These aren't feel-good sailing stories. They're the technical and financial framework I wish someone had handed me the day I walked onto that dock with a checkbook. Every ratio, every inspection checklist, every question the broker hopes you never ask, it's all in there. You can find them described in the links in the description below, but the motion was only the first surprise, and honestly, it was the cheap one. Because a catamaran doesn't just cost you sleep, it costs you double on almost everything, and that's where the real bleeding starts. Let me tell you what doubled means in dollars, because when I bought that Lagoon, nobody sat me down and did this arithmetic. A catamaran has 2 hulls. That sounds obvious. What it means in practice is 2 engines, 2 sail drives, 2 propellers, 2 sets of engine mounts, 2 fuel systems, 2 of almost everything that breaks, and everything that breaks on a boat breaks in salt water on a schedule, whether you're ready or not. Take the sail drives. Most production catamarans, including mine, don't have a traditional propeller shaft going straight out the back. They have a sail drive, which is basically an outboard leg that drops straight down through the bottom of the hull. Where that leg passes through the hull, there's a rubber seal, a diaphragm, and the entire ocean is on the other side of it. The manufacturer, in my case, Volvo Penta, recommends replacing that diaphragm every 7 years. Not because they want your money, because if it fails, water comes in and the boat can sink at the dock while you're at home mowing the lawn. On a monohull with one engine, that's one seal, one job. On my Cat, it was 2. And every single haul out, every yard bill, every bottom job, every zinc, every through hull, every cutlass bearing, I was buying 2 of them. When I finally added up my 3rd season of ownership, I was spending right around $18,000 a year just to keep that boat maintained and floating. Not cruising, not upgrading, just standing still and not sinking. And then there's the part the marina doesn't advertise until you call. They charge by the beam. My Lagoon was almost 22 feet wide. A monohull of the same length is maybe 12, 13 feet wide. So at nearly every marina I called, I paid a beam surcharge, sometimes 1.5 times the standard rate, sometimes double, because I took up a slip and a half. In some of the prettier harbors in the Caribbean and the Mediterranean, they flat out told me they had no space wide enough, or the space they had cost more per night than a hotel room ashore. Haul out was worse. A standard travel lift at a boatyard has a set width between the straps. Plenty of yards simply couldn't lift a boat as wide as mine, so I had to shop around for the yards that could, and those yards knew they had me. The wide beam haul out cost me nearly 3 times what my friend paid for his 38-foot monohull that same season. So here's the confession. I did the math on purchase price. Everybody does the math on purchase price. What I never did was the math on the cost of ownership over 5 years, and that's the number that actually empties your account. 2 engines, beam surcharges, wide haul outs, double the running gear. If you're comparing a Cat and a monohull at the same price, you are not comparing 2 equal boats. You're comparing a boat with 1 heart to a boat with 2, and the 2-hearted one asks for blood twice as often. Now, I can hear the objection, because I made it myself. You're thinking the monohull is the safe, cheap answer. Buy the narrow boat, save the money, sleep well. And I'm here to tell you that's the second trap, because the monohull has a way of hiding its costs in a place you literally cannot see from the dock. The monohull hides its money below the waterline, and it hides it inside the hull itself. After I sold that Catamaran, and I'll tell you what selling her cost me in a minute, I went the other direction. I went looking for a real blue water monohull, the kind of boat that gets talked about in reverent tones on the forums. I ended up chasing a Valiant 40, designed by Robert Perry, first launched in 1973. It's one of the most respected cruising hulls ever drawn in America. A double-ender, a canoe stern, a boat with a reputation for crossing oceans and bringing people home. I thought, finally, I'm buying the smart boat, the one the experienced people buy, and I almost bought a hull that was quietly rotting from the inside. Here's the part almost nobody outside the surveyor world knows. The Valiants, built roughly between 1976 and about 1981, had a serious problem. During those years, the builder used a fire-retardant resin in the layup, and that resin reacted with water over time and caused blistering, not the little cosmetic gel coat blisters everybody talks about, but deep blistering in the laminate itself. Owners called them the blister boats. For years, people argued about which hull numbers were affected and how bad it really was. A boat that looked absolutely beautiful in the listing could have a hull that was slowly turning to oatmeal underneath the paint. I had a surveyor I trusted, a member of the Society of Accredited Marine Surveyors, and he told me flat out, on any Valiant from that window, walk the hull with a moisture meter and sound the whole thing with a hammer before you fall in love. The boat I was looking at, a lovely 1978 hull with fresh paint and a foresail story that pulled at the heart, lit that moisture meter up like a Christmas tree along the turn of the bilge. The seller had painted right over the problem. The listing called her turnkey. That's when it clicked for me, standing in that boatyard, that the villain here was never the Cat or the monohull. The villain was the way these boats get sold. Somebody profited from what I didn't know. On the Catamaran, Nobody told me about the beam surcharge or the double sail drives because the guy selling wanted the sail. On the Monohull, somebody painted over a known hull defect and wrote the word turnkey because a fresh coat of paint and a good story sells a boat faster than honesty ever will. So let me give you the practical part. The part you can actually use on your short list this week. On any older monohull, and I mean anything built before the mid-1980s especially, you are buying the hull first and the boat second. Get a moisture reading, sound the hull, ask specifically about the resin and the build years, because on famous hulls like the Valiant, the bad years are documented if you know to ask, and check the keel bolts and the keel to hull joint, because on a monohull, all that ballast hangs off the bottom on boats that live in salt water their whole lives, and a weeping keel joint is a 5-figure repair hiding behind a smile. On the Cat, you're buying the engineering and the running gear first. On the monohull, you're buying the hull and the ballast first. Two completely different inspections, two completely different ways to get burned. But here's what I really want you to sit with, because it's the thing that took me 2 boats and nearly 6 years to understand. Neither of these problems, not the slamming, not the blistering, not the doubled costs, is actually the deciding factor. They're all symptoms. There's one root question underneath all of it, and if you get that question right, everything else falls into place. And I promised you at the start I'd give you that number. We're almost there. But first, I need to talk directly to the people watching this who already own a boat, because I know some of you are sitting there thinking this whole video is for first-time buyers, and you already made your choice, and there's nothing here for you. Stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you, and it's something you can go check tomorrow morning on the boat you already own, without a broker, without spending a dime. If you already own a cruising boat, cat, or monohull, I want you to do 3 things this week, because every one of them is a problem I either lived through or watched a friend live through, and every one of them you can inspect yourself at the dock. If you own a catamaran with saildrives, go find the service records for those diaphragm seals. Right now, if you can't find a record of them being replaced in the last 7 years, assume they haven't been. That rubber is the only thing between you and the ocean, and it lives underwater, flexing, aging, quietly perishing. You don't need a haul out to start. You can open the engine compartments, look at the top of the sail drive leg where it meets the hull, and check for any weeping, any corrosion, any water where water shouldn't be. Then get a real quote for the replacement so the number doesn't ambush you next spring. I know an owner who lost his boat at a mooring because that seal let go while he was 200 miles away. Don't be him. If you own a monohull, I want you to go look at your keel bolts and the joint where the keel meets the hull. Pull up the floorboards, get down in the bilge with a flashlight and a rag, and wipe the bolts and the joint clean and dry. Then come back a day later and look again. If you see rust weeping, if you see a fine crack line along the joint, if you see any staining that returns after you've dried it, you've got the beginning of a keel problem, and catching it now at the dock for the price of a flashlight is the difference between a maintenance item and a catastrophe. And for everybody, cat or mono, go find the date on your standing rigging, the wire, the fittings, the swages that hold your mast up. The general guidance from riggers and from a lot of insurance companies is that standing rigging has a working life of somewhere around 10 to 15 years in a cruising life, less in the tropics with hard use. If you don't know how old yours is, that itself is the finding. A dismasting doesn't just cost you the rig, it can cost you the boat, and it always happens in the worst possible weather, never at the dock on a calm day. None of those 3 checks needs a haul out. None of them needs a surveyor. All 3 of them are things sellers count on you not looking at, and all 3 of them I've either paid for or watched a friend pay for. So whether you're shopping or you already own, you just got your Saturday morning list. Now, let me give you the number I've been promising since the first minute. This is the one measurement that sits underneath the whole cat versus monohull decision, and once I show it to you, you'll never walk a dock the same way again. When I was drowning in that lagoon, slamming through a head sea at 2 in the morning, I started reading everything I could find about why some catamarans beat you to death and others ride like a dream. And I kept coming back to the naval architects, the people who actually draw these boats, and to a single ratio they all quietly obsess over that almost never shows up in a sales listing. It's called bridgedeck clearance. It's simply the height between the water and the underside of that flat deck bridging the two hulls. And the rule the good designers follow is that this clearance should be roughly 5% of the boat's overall beam, sometimes expressed as a proportion of the waterline length. Get much below that, and the boat slams. Get it right, and the same wave that hammered my boat just passes underneath and disappears. Robert Perry, the same man who drew that Valiant back in 1973, has written for decades about the geometry of how a hull meets a wave, and the catamaran designers live and die by this clearance number. But here's the thing that made my jaw drop when I finally understood it. My Lagoon 380, the boat that ruined a passage and nearly ruined my marriage, had a bridge deck clearance that was on the low side for her beam. It was never a bad boat. It was a boat sold to me for the wrong use. Marina life and gentle anchorages, she was perfect. Open ocean passages into a head sea, she was a punishment. And the number would have told me that before I ever wrote the check. And you can measure it yourself. This is the part the sellers never volunteer. Next time you're looking at a catamaran, at the dock, in the water, take a tape measure. Measure from the waterline straight up to the lowest point of the underside of that bridgedeck, the flat part between the hulls, usually right where the accommodation begins. Then measure the boat's beam, or find it in the specs. Divide the clearance by the beam. If you're getting down around 3%, that boat is going to slam hard offshore, and no amount of pretty teak inside will fix it. If you're up near 5% or better, you're looking at a boat that will actually let you sleep on passage. That's it. A tape measure and a division problem, no surveyor, no sea trial in a gale. And it cuts straight through every glossy listing, because the listing will tell you the number of cabins and the year of the sails, but it will never, ever tell you the bridge deck clearance, because that number separates the boats built to cross oceans from the boats built to look good at the dock. The knowledge was always there. The designers knew it from the very beginning. The sellers just had every reason in the world to keep you from measuring it. Now you've got the tape measure. And it works in reverse on the monohull too, which is the beautiful part. A monohull doesn't have a bridgedeck to slam, but it has its own version of this hidden truth, and it's the ballast ratio and the hull shape. A narrow, heavy monohull with deep ballast, like that Perry-drawn Valiant, rolls and recovers and shoulders through a sea in a way that's tiring but safe. It won't slam you awake, but it'll rock you like a metronome. The motion question is the real question underneath everything. Not space, not price, not speed. How does this specific hull with these specific numbers treat your body when the water gets rough and you're 40 miles from anywhere and you have to keep going anyway? So when people ask me cat or monohull, I don't answer with the boat. I answer with the question, where are you really going to use her? Honestly, not in the dream. If you're going to live at anchor in warm, protected water and do short, weather-picked hops, the space and stability of a catamaran is a gift, as long as you check that clearance and you can afford to feed 2 engines. If you're going to make real passages, cross real oceans, go where the weather isn't always your friend, then a well-found monohull with the right numbers will carry you when the catamaran would be beating you senseless, and it'll cost you half as much to keep. The boat isn't the answer, your honest use is the answer, and the numbers just tell you the truth about which hull matches it. That Lagoon, by the way, I sold her after 3 seasons. Between the beam surcharges, the double haul outs, the saildrive service, and the depreciation, I walked away having lost close to $60,000 on a boat I bought for the space and sold because of the motion. That's the tuition I paid so you don't have to. That's the whole reason I'm sitting here. Here's what I want you to take away, and I want you to feel it, not just file it. You just avoided the exact mistake that cost me $60,000 in a very long, very quiet night at sea with a wife who wanted off the boat. You now know the one number the listing will never show you, and you know how to measure it with a tool from your garage. That puts you ahead of 90% of the people walking those docks with a checkbook and a dream, because you're the kind of buyer who does the homework before the money moves. You don't trust the glossy photos. You don't take turnkey at face value. You measure, you sound the hull, you find the date on the rigging, and you ask the question the seller hopes you never ask. That's exactly the person I'm making these videos for. So let me ask you something specific, and I really want you to answer this one. What boat are you looking at right now, and is it a cat or a monohull? Drop it in the comments, tell me the model and the year, and tell me where you're watching from. If it's a catamaran, tell me you're going to go measure that bridge deck clearance, because I promise you the listing didn't mention it. If it's a monohull, tell me the build years, and I might just tell you whether it's one of the ones with a hull problem hiding under the paint. I read these, and I answer them. And if you're serious about not getting burned on a six-figure boat, subscribe and stand with the rest of us who refuse to buy a broker story instead of a survey. We're a group of people who'd rather spend $20 on a moisture meter than $60,000 on a lesson. Next time, I'm going to name the 3 production cruising boats from the 1980s that surveyors quietly refuse to bless, no matter how good the listing looks, and one of them is a boat almost everybody on the forums tells you to buy. You do not want to find out you own it after the money's gone. I'll see you there. I stood right where you are now, and I put everything else into the cruising compass. This video gave you the overview, but inside I pick up exactly where we just stopped. And if you get stuck, you can ask me directly. I answer you myself. No bots. Sailboat buyers like you are already in there with me. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime, no risk.